everybody. So I guess we're going to kick off this panel. Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Lindsay LaFave, and I'm a delegate from the 39th Congressional District, the organizer, professor, and an education activist. And I'm really excited for everyone to join this panel entitled, "Should I Stay or Should I Go? Bernie Voter Ponders the Democratic Party." So just to briefly introduce you to our panelists, and they'll be able to speak to you directly in just a few minutes. We're going to be joined by Lawrence Taylor, who's president of the People for Democratic Party Reform, Laura Wells from the California Green Party organizer and member of the California Progressive Alliance and DSA, Nick Brana, who's the national coordinator for the Movement for a People's Party, and Judith Whitmer, the Nevada delegation chair to the DNC, a pleo for Bernie Sanders, and acting first vice chair of the Clark County Democratic Party in Las Vegas, and also the chair emeritus of Left Caucus. So our agenda, we're gonna have our speakers speak for about 3 minutes each, and they'll each go through one by one, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. While you're listening, please type your questions in the chat so that way our panelists can read as well. And so to kick it off, we're gonna start with Lawrence Taylor, and I'm gonna be nicely timing everybody as well. And I'm also gonna be co-hosted by Margie. Margie, don't forget to introduce yourself before Lawrence starts us off.
Okay, I'm Margie Hoyt. I was asked to help put this panel together. I'm a Bernie delegate in California District 43, that's Maxine Waters District. And then there's Dennis in the background too that's going to be helping out.
Thank you both so much for putting this panel together and bringing us all together to have this amazing conversation. So without further ado, Lawrence Taylor, will you please take it away and let me know if you want a refresher on our topics of discussion from the agenda.
No, I think I got it. Thank you so much for doing this. This is very cool. So the first segment that we will be addressing is the current state of affairs. And
how we got here.
And how we got here. So the Democratic Party is the oldest and most powerful political party in the world. There is an anti-democratic culture that has permeated the leadership and is widespread. We are finding egregious abuse of power across the country and at all levels of the organization, the national, state, and county. And we know the Democratic Party doesn't even follow its own rules. We saw this in both 2016 and 2020. But just as the people can be changed, so can the culture of the organization. Progressives quit the party because they get disgusted with the leadership and they leave the party in the hands of the centrists who do not represent the people. And you know, a great example of this is the Working Families Party, which was formed in 1998. So they're 22 years old. And you know, how many people do they have in Congress at this point? And think of how much better it would be if they had stayed in the Democratic Party and worked to pull it to the left and make it more progressive instead of just leaving it to the establishment. So my attitude is this is my party. I am not leaving because someone in the leadership has done something that pissed me off. Nancy Pelosi, Tom Perez, DWS, these are all elected and they can be replaced, and that's what we intend to do. It is in the bylaws that allow for these numerous undemocratic practices. Things like the standing committees being all appointed by the DNC chair, and it's also where the superdelegates get their power. But these bylaws can be changed, and that is the purpose of People for Democratic Party Reform. To make those changes, we need votes. So we know the Democratic Party has been late to the table for many major issues. They were late on getting on board with women's suffrage, they were late with segregation, and they were late with LGBTQ rights. But through the perseverance of Democrats who champion these issues, we now have a party that bases its strength on women, counts the Black vote as essential, and champions the rights of the LGBTQ community as if they had always been there. So our task is to make the same kind of change by making the Democratic Party embrace democracy, which is the only way, which will only make it a stronger organization.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. So succinct. And I can't wait to have this further discussion about the power of bylaws in a few minutes. So next is going to be Laura Wells, California Green Party organizer, member of California Progressive Alliance and DSA. And go ahead.
So we have a two-party system, not just a two-party system, but it's an aggressively two-party system. Don't we wish, I mean, like the majority of Americans, that even the debates would include more than just those two parties, but they have a, sounds like a governmental agency, but a commission on the presidential debates. And rather than include all the candidates that could potentially win because they've struggled and fought to get ballot access, the Democrats and Republicans automatically have it. But the Green Party and the Libertarians fight for it and are on enough ballots that they could potentially win. Imagine if the debates included the Green Party, then the subject of Medicare for all, actually improved Medicare for all, would come up. But with two candidates, neither one of which really supports Medicare for all, the subject won't even necessarily come up. Now, the reason that the Green Party has achieved the strength that it has, and it's the strongest progressive independent party in the country and has been for a couple of decades. But partly the reason for that is that we're international. And so we have that staying party. And the Green Party is national. It's in almost all of the states has ballot access for the Green Party, as it does for the Libertarian, because we have to fight for it, and we do. It's almost like what doesn't kill you keeps you strong. So there are all these obstacles that are put in the way of even surviving. And the fact that the Green Party has survived is a big success. And we've had a lot of local electeds, and you get just one person on a city council or a school board or in Congress, you know, that's not taking corporate money and that has the values of peace and justice in the environment and real democracy. And that will make a difference. One of the things that's interesting about the Green Party is that we are very decentralized. And so that actually helps us be sustainable, because if one person leaves, that doesn't knock out the whole party, because we're not dependent on one person being a leader. And we've been, if you look at progressive think tanks, probably the Green Party is the most successful progressive think tank in the United States. And because we're a political party, we run candidates, so we get the word out on such things that we've been promoting for a long time: legalization of marijuana, along with marriage equality. And now public banking is in the public mind. The real Green New Deal came out first 10 years ago. Howie Hawkins, who's running for president, was the one that came up with that. And so the stronger that so many of us want something better than the Democrats and the Republicans. And so the stronger the Green Party is now, because it is the progressive alternative, the progressive pusher, then the stronger, the better chance we have in the future. So my wish for today is for this panel to inspire people to use all of the power that we have right now to pressure this system toward the world that we want, with Medicare for all, with peace, with better justice, education, and environment for all of us.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm really looking forward to talking about ballot access in the Q&A portion, so I hope we can circle back to that. Next up is Nick Brana from Movement for a People's Party, and go ahead, Nick.
Thank you to Margie and to everyone who has helped organize this panel and put together this amazing conversation. This is really, I think, very much the question that confronts us is, what strategy, where do we go from here? Because what we've lived through, not only over the past 4 years, but decades has been, ever since the New Deal, you have seen two parties that have become increasingly corporate. And when it reached the 70s, it became a sprint, essentially. And the two parties have gone further and further to the right, taking more corporate money now. You had the neoliberal transition during the Clinton years of the Democratic Party. And so the Democratic Party has completely abandoned its base of working people. A friend of mine put it very well, Ryan Knight, on social media recently. He said on Twitter that we have a corporatist party and we have a fascist party in the US. And so when they get together to compromise, the compromise is corporatist and pro-billionaire policies. And that shouldn't surprise any of us, because the DNC is effectively a committee of corporations, and they cannot do more to demonstrate that to us than they're doing right now. Time after time, they vote to accept corporate lobbyists onto the DNC. They vote to not eliminate corporate money out of the party. Brent Welder recently helped lead an effort to get it out in the Rules Committee. And instead, they put up a corporate lobbyist to argue against it on the Rules Committee just recently. And that is, he told me the second time that they've done that, in fact. In 2016, they also put up a corporate lobbyist to argue against it. So in the big picture, the Democrats, it's worse than it is in 2008. It's worse than it is in 2016. In 2008, at least Obama pretended to be progressive. At least he ran on the right things. He said, he said he was going to tackle the climate emergency. He said he was going to go after special interest money in politics. He said that he was going to pass Medicare for all. He didn't do any of those things, but they pretended. Hillary Clinton, she could hardly bring herself to pretend. And Biden, she made that offer of 50 to 55, lowering the age of Medicare, for example. Biden, he couldn't even go that far. He offered 60, lowering the age. And so on issue after issue, that's one example, but on issue after issue, we're going backwards in the Democratic Party. And both of the parties continue their slide towards oligarchy. In 2016, we kind of embarked on this mission to reform the Democratic Party. And now we have an obligation to ourselves and to the country to take stock of how that has actually gone, and to ask ourselves, what are the results? What are the results of that? Have we managed to reverse within the Democratic Party the desire for there not to be a single payer healthcare system? Or have we managed to make it a party that doesn't take corporate money? Have we managed to make it a party that embraces education for everyone with free public college, or that fights to break up the banks or reduce inequality? And the answer is no, 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 and no. And so we need outside pressure. We need an actual party that is for the people, because one of the most important insights that Bernie taught us in 2016 and 2020 is that you cannot take corporate money and be corporate funded and be for the people at the same time. And even the Congressional Progressive Caucus is awash in corporate money in the Democratic Party. What we need is a sea change from what is being described in the committees, the platform, the Rules Committee right now. What working people are feeling, with tens of millions of people facing eviction and millions of people losing their employer-based healthcare, that is so radically divorced from the conversations that are going on in the Democratic Party and the corporate pageantry that we're about to witness at the DNC and the RNC. So the last thing that I'll say is that on August 30th, 1 week after the Republican convention, the Movement for a People's Party is hosting the People's Convention. And we have Dr. Cornel West and Senator Nina Turner, Bernie 2020 co-chair, joining us to co-host that event. And we're honored to have them. And we're honored to say, this is what we need to do now. We are called upon to plant a flag and say that we need to do something different. And we have many amazing speakers joining us for that. And we hope that you will join us too.
Nick. Okay, next we're going to hear from Judith Whitmer, who is currently the Nevada Delegation Chair to the DNC. Take it away, Judith.
Thank you. I want to go back to the historic part of that question, which was how we got here. A lot of people like to point to the Powell memo from 1971 as the corporate blueprint for the corporate takeover of America. But I would suggest that it really was triggered by a very moderate growth in liberalism from the 60s that triggered the corporate response and the rise of the conservative think tank. Heritage Foundation pretty much wrote the whole agenda for the Reagan administration. Then you had the taxpayer protection pledge from Norquist that Republicans banked on. You know, they ran on that no new taxes pledge all the time. And then the problem is that Democrats have let Republicans define us. So we're the party of taxes. We're the party that's soft on the military. We're the party that's big on spending. We're the party that doesn't approve military budgets. All those things that have proved to be totally false. But the problem is that Democrats always start from a position of trying to match the Republican position. We're always willing to compromise before we even start negotiating. And that's been a huge problem and a huge factor of how we got here. There's been a fixation on deficits by both parties that prevent us from having real programs for the people. Then we can also talk about the rise of the Fox News propaganda channel. And Democrats have not done a very good job of counter-attacking that propaganda. The messaging always sounds good from Republicans, like taxpayer protection pledge, the Patriot Act, all these things that we know that's not the real intention behind the title, but Democrats have done very little to counter those attacks by Republicans. So how we got here is a mixture of things. We can also point to Citizens United in 2010. How many of you know that Citizens United was an actual group that was trying to air a movie, basically, or a documentary that was critical of Hillary Clinton? And the Democratic Party went all in on trying to stop that, and it reached the Supreme Court. And so now we have Citizens United. So, you know, the Democratic Party has got to start being more strategic. It has to start standing with the people again, and has to start being more bold in action and encountering and counterattacking Republicans. The problem here is there hasn't been a real will to do that. Democratic Party still thinks that it's the party of centrists. They still govern that way. They still think that the status quo, maintaining the status quo, is the ideal goal. And the problem also is that the status quo has actually benefited both parties. It's absolutely benefited both parties. We talk every 4 years, every presidential election, we talk about the same issues over and over again. We can't even get past things like choice. You know, it's all about guns, Bible, and abortion on both sides. So the problem of how we got here, that's just sort of a brief summary of how I think we got here to where we are now. So we can all agree that the party is corrupt. There's no question of that. I think I can point to specific examples under Debbie Wasserman Schultz, where they started taking PAC money, even though Obama had pledged not to take PAC money. So from there on, they never turned the tap off. So there's always been a tradition of corruption in any political party. And with all due respect to the Green Party and the Movement for People's Party, every time that the Democratic Party does something really stupid, like deny the nomination to Bernie Sanders, there's a surge in membership for the Green Party or other startup parties. But none of those third parties have been successful in continuing to grow their membership or to keep their members actively engaged. And part of that reason is because they always focus on the national stage instead of looking at what they can do on the local stage. I'm not going to say that they haven't had any successes, but there really hasn't been any traction. The Green Party's been around for decades. And they have done some good work. I'm not saying that they haven't. I'm just saying that if we think that that's going to be our savior from a corrupt system, which is full on oligarchy at this point, it's not going to happen until we remove the obstruction. And that's why I think it has to be a two-pronged approach. So basically, I agree with all of you, but it has to be both. We have to work from the inside and the outside. We have to take down the structure. We have to take over the party. Yes, it's my party, but I also know that my party is not working for the people. And the only way that we're going to start working for the people is to start putting ourselves into key positions within the party and start taking those positions and start dismantling the corruption from the local level up. We have to start electing people into those positions. And, you know, being a party leader or running for a position for your state executive board, those are places where you have more power than you think you do. It may not sound like it, but we've made a lot of changes in Nevada. And we started from the caucus organizing forward, and we kept our delegates organized all the way through the convention. And we were able to elect 9 out of 10 of our candidates to the state party executive board. So we now effectively have control of that our state party. We're doing the same things at the local levels. This is a way that you get control of your party locally and start to make the necessary changes, because we won't have a successful third party until we can remove the obstruction. So that's the goal, is to remove the obstruction. And then we've got to get better at our own ground game and recruiting candidates and organizing and forming coalitions and partnerships to put up the right candidates. And we've got to start playing to win.
Thank you for that, Judith. I'm really glad that you brought up the organizing component of this, because right now we're going to take a few minutes to hear from some activists on the ground about their perceptions of this. We're going to hear about from Farrah Mars and then Nick Gaines, who's a Bernie delegate. So Farrah Mars, do you mind coming up real quick? He was a Bernie 2016-2020 volunteer. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. Just one moment for him to come off mute.
Lindsay, he says.
Thank you. I just got unmuted. Thank you so much. My name is Farrah Mars PABBB. I've been volunteering on and off for Bernie for 5 years now. And in between, after he lost the primary, I also volunteered for the Jill Stein, Jamu Baraka campaign. So I have the perspective of, you know, working within the Democratic Party. I have the perspective of what it was like working or volunteering for a third party. And so I'm filling in here on the question of electoralism. So we've had speakers say we can make change through the Democratic Party, and we've had speakers talk about making change through new parties or third parties. And I'm going to make the case that we can also make change by going beyond electoralism. And for me, what has really inspired me on this is seeing the success of the Black liberation movement, the Black Lives Matter groups that have really transformed the debate this summer over police killings and police violence. And this happened not because of leadership by elected officials, but really in spite of them. And I don't by any means believe that we should wait passively for people to get killed or to be in tragic circumstances to organize. But what it does show is that when we're able to mobilize such large numbers of people, that the status quo cannot continue, that the businesses are not able to open because there are people physically blocking the streets and people physically unwilling to participate in the economy. That forces the elected officials to listen to our demands. They might not give us everything, and we cannot go home and expect everything to work out if we don't continue to apply pressure. But it does show that particularly in a time like the COVID pandemic, where playing the long game, whether it's in terms of adding incremental numbers to the squad, or whether it's adding local elected officials to a third party, isn't going to manifest itself quickly enough, that we also need to think about non-electoral strategies. The second point that I'd like to make is that some of the electeds that we've had success with, you know, like Jamal Bowman, it's very energizing. But at the same time, are we actually making progress? Some of the Justice Democrats that were elected in 2018, like Colin Allred, representative in Texas, have abandoned Medicare for all. And even some of those that were just elected, like Richie Torres, right next door to Jamal Bowman in New York City, replacing a progressive member of Congress, Jose Serrano. He actually cut a deal with the New York police union, the same one that just endorsed Trump yesterday, to gut the legislation that Black Lives Matter had been pushing in the New York City Council. So he calls himself progressive. He replaced a progressive, but is he progressive? So I think we need to be careful when we have this level of enthusiasm. We have had some great victories, but we might not be progressing as fast as we think. So I will finish my comment here with the idea that the change that we can enact through electoral politics is not necessarily where we're going to get the most bang for our buck in the short term. That doesn't mean we have to abandon electoral politics, but it does mean how we spend our time is going to be a driving component of how successful we are. How we spend our time is a vote towards what we believe in. And so that's why I personally, going forward, am shifting my time from being primarily driven towards electoral politics to primarily based on non-electoral strategies for direct action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so next, Nick, I see that you have your hand up, but I'm actually going to give you the floor as an activist and a delegate for a few minutes, so that way you could address our crowd on this issue, because I know that you've been anxious to speak on it. You ready?
Which Nick?
There we go. Hey, everybody. Nick Gaines here, Bernie delegate from Congressional District 30. To give you guys a little bit of perspective, I do, like Farmar, see both sides of this debate. I was a volunteer and a field organizer for Bernie Sanders in 2016. I then became actually an organizer for the Working Families Party. So thank you, Lawrence, for the shout out to the Working Families Party. And I was part of the campaign to institute ranked choice voting in New York City. So I understand how important it is to have structural change if we're actually going to uplift third parties. But I want to be very explicit about something that we haven't really gotten into in this panel. This election is unlike any other in my lifetime, and I think in the lifetimes of most of the people here. We all do need to join together to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to defeat Donald Trump in November. And I know a lot of people are disappointed that Kamala Harris got the VP nomination. I fought really hard to get Karen Bass and Barbara Lee. Many of the other delegates on this call know that I was part of those organizing efforts. But now that we have our ticket, we've got the team that is available to us to take out the existential threat to America that is Donald Trump. And he really is that. But I want to be very clear about something that I think the media doesn't give enough attention to, that we need to really sear into people as part of our activism. November 4th may be the date the media is looking at, but the date that's circled on my calendar is April 30th, 2021. That is 100 days into the Biden-Harris administration. If after that 100-day mark, we don't see a historic spending package, I'm talking $10 trillion over 10 years, $100 trillion over 100 years is what I want to see. The institution in law of the Clyburn rule, 10% of all federal money in communities with 20% poverty over 30 years or more. We need to see sizable generational investments, or that administration is not just falling flat of the mandate that we're giving them by having them be the ones that throw out Donald Trump. They will have lost the legitimacy of government. And at that point, what I've been saying to organizers, I've been saying to my boss, who's an elected official in Los Angeles, I will march on Washington to burn down the White House myself if they fail to meet this moment, if they continue with the incrementalist reforms that led us to this trifecta crisis that we're in right now. You know, a man who changed the world once said that there are decades that go by where nothing happens, and there are weeks that go by where decades happen. I believe between November 4th and April 30th, we will be in one of those moments where we have weeks where we can make decades of change possible. And if we don't, we're going to put on one hell of a fireworks show July 4th of next year. So thank you all. Vote Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in November, and then let's let the real work start. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nick. So we do have a few questions in the queue. Roberto Alvarez, who's a delegate, do you want to take yourself on unmute real quick and ask a brief question to our panelists?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So talking about the strategy that we had to follow, right? Because there is no good strategy if there is not a threat to anybody in the establishment. We had to be forceful enough to feel him like a threat, that we are not playing games, that what we are fighting is for real, and that we are real people in the streets, right? On the streets, that we can fight and we can have the support of the people, because as you can see in my background, those are the issues that we are fighting for. Issues that they didn't start yesterday. Those are issues that have been compiling and growing up from the last 20, 30 years, right? And now we have been hitting a tipping point where everything is coming together and people by the millions is going to be suffering greatly. It's not just about climate change. It's not about the economy. It's not just about the justice that it has to be in this country. It is all, everything is coming together. And when we had all these problems coming at once, we had to be able to resolve it in the right way. And what the corporates do is take advantage of all this chaos that is happening every single time. And they gain all the power even more when there is a crisis. They get more bailouts, they get more money for themselves, they don't get the justice that is deserved for all these people that break the laws. So in order to make that change within the Democratic Party, we had to have an outside threat also. If there is a third party or there is something else, it has to be real, it has to grow. And we had to be fighting all those fronts, the inside and the outside strategy. And we had to all understand and make that change in the minds of the people that is within the Democratic Party, that business as usual is done. We are over with it because it's not working. We had to do something else different. And we had to show the power that we have. Polling shows that more of the people in the United States wants Medicare for all. Why is not happening? Why these politicians are not doing the will of the people? Then we had to out them, we had to shame them, and we had to make sure that we run somebody against them when time comes. I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you. Let's keep fighting, everybody. Thank you.
So thank you, Roberto. I want to parlay that comment into a question for the panelists. So maybe we can just think for a second, and I would like all of you to maybe address this in your own way. You know, we're talking to a new generation of delegates and a new generation of activists in this worldwide stage that we're on right this moment. What would you say to those folks about strategy, or where should the energy go to? You know, there's a lot of discussion about the local level, the national level. What do you as panelists think is, what's the prize? What should people be looking towards? Lawrence, would you mind going first? And if not Lawrence, maybe Laura?
I would say all of the above. We are all different, and that's a wonderful quality when we're facing all the problems that we're facing. Different, you know, it's like follow the money to understand what's going wrong, where the corruption is, but follow your heart in terms of what it is that is your gift to give. So, but I do want to correct something about the Green Party. It isn't an either national or local. If we don't run for president, we die. And Green parties in the cities and the states die. So we have to run for president in order to maintain ballot status in the states. Now, the thing is that I think Roberto was talking about pressure. The biggest false belief was something that came out of the mouth of Margaret Thatcher when she and her good buddy Reagan were heads of state in the 1980s, and that was Tina. There is no alternative. And so as long as the Democratic leadership, and I make a big difference between Democratic leadership and Democrats rank and file, but if the Democratic leadership are not going to bite themselves in their own stomach, their money comes from the pharmaceuticals, the anti-Medicare group, the war, the banks, you know, that's where their money comes from. That's where they're going to go. And so if they think that everybody of us 100 here or what, and across the whole state of California, if they think we've got nowhere to go, they don't have to do anything we want. They don't even come to California, and except to fundraise. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton, not especially well loved, got 4 million more votes than Trump. 62% to 32% is what Hillary Clinton got over Donald Trump. And it's very likely to be just as strong a difference this year. And so a whole lot of people could say, you know what, I've got someplace else to go right now. There's the Green Party, and I'm going to vote Green because I want Medicare for all. I want public banks. I don't want war. And so pressure, 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 the 3 rules of politics, pressure. If they don't feel pressure, if you've got nowhere to go, if Tina is true, there is no alternative, then we will continue to get from the Democrats and the Republicans what we've been getting, and worse.
Thank you, Laura. Nick or Judith, do you mind taking a stab at what the prize is, or what your ultimate organizing goal or strategy you would give to this new generation of delegates?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to. So I'm a really big proponent of direct action. Direct action is not only effective, it's the only way sometimes that you can get great change. We've seen it time and time again in history. But I think that direct action has to be, just as it says, a direct action regarding a certain issue or around a certain issue. And to what Nicholas said earlier, I agree. The real work starts after November. There's nothing that we can do to change the outcome of the Democratic Convention at this point. Yes, we're going to keep pushing on the platform. Yes, we're going to keep pushing on reforms and changes to the rules and to make it a fairer, more democratic process. But the actual Democratic nominee is going to be Joe Biden, regardless of how we all feel about that. So what we have to start doing now is start focusing on the work that we need to do to make sure that under a Biden administration, Medicare for all is enacted, and other issues that we feel strongly and passionate about as progressives. When I say that it's got to be a 2-pronged approach, it means that working progressives and leftists and people at Dem Exited, people that are in Green Party, all these progressive organizations have to start working together to create a mass movement. Bernie talked about that over and over again. It takes a massive movement of people to affect change. We've seen some of that with the Black Lives Matter movement. But still, I mean, the Democratic Party is still, I mean, they're talking about reform, but I still see them voting for huge military budgets at the same time. What I think we need to start doing is organizing a massive movement and a massive march as soon as Biden takes the White House, as soon as inauguration, or right after inauguration. There should be a massive movement of people in DC and all across the country demanding Medicare for all. I mean, those are the type of things that affect real change. But as far as the big picture and how we get to have a viable third party, and actually I'd like to see more than 3 parties. At some point, I think there should be more parties that represent the people, that are more representative of our diversity of the people of this country. So the only way to get there is to start removing the obstruction that we face all the time and getting progressives elected, getting a seat at the table, getting our voices heard. And the reason I say start locally is because if you can effectively change things in your own community and start working on that, you don't have to separate the two. You can do both. But a lot of times we get so focused on what's going on the national stage that we forget about the things that we can do that may seem very small, and they're not anywhere near as big as the change that we want to see. But it heads us in the direction of transformative change. For instance, right now, establishments are presenting an amendment that would be an effective gag rule, and they would be policing progressives for any indication that we are endorsing or supporting or volunteering or donating toward a progressive primary challenger in an election. Just think about that for a minute. But because we worked hard to now have the majority of the executive board and the majority of the membership, because we elected a new central committee and we made sure to organize and engage with all these people to make sure that they joined and got elected to the central committee, they won't be able to get that passed. But that's going on all around the country. There's a distinct and deliberate attempt to block progressives at every level. So we've got to remove that obstruction, and then we've got to build our own electoral structure, because yes, direct action is awesome, and I believe in it firmly. I believe in the goal of third parties, but I don't think we can get there until we start having a system where we can start winning and take the obstruction out of our way and be smarter. Because right here in Nevada, Bernie won by landslide, and he did that because we had an effective ground game. We engaged with people. We knew what issues they cared about, and we used that to get out the vote. And it's just that simple. If we have an effective ground game, if we work as coalitions with all these organizations to build a coalition so that we're directing all of our resources together to get these candidates elected, then we will start winning. But we've got to start putting that structure into place, because I've seen it over and over again where progressives will run for a race, but they're not prepared to win. And that's what we have to start changing that. So that's why I say a two-pronged approach, and it's got to be the inside and the outside working together. We're not on opposite sides of the fence here. We're trying to achieve the same goals, and we have to start remembering that and start taking power for ourselves.
Thank you, Judith. Lauren?
As I was going to say earlier, only a tiny fraction of the Democrats, registered Democrats in the country, participate in the party. And that's because the Democratic Party has been run as a priesthood. They've not been particularly outreaching to pull people in because they don't want anyone spoiling their party. So I would encourage people to track down your local organization and get involved and start volunteering. And don't do it as a revolutionary and scare them off. But we found that the most successful approach is to embrace them with love and volunteer for the activities and just move in and take over. And by infusing our people inside the party is how we will affect change. After 2016, Bernie did win a majority in my state, and we did take over control of a couple of key committees like the State Rules Committee. And the establishment could yammer all they wanted, but we would vote them down. We lost that advantage in 2 years later, and now we have been sitting there having to have these horrible rules passed over our heads because we don't have the votes to block them. We can't do that anymore. We have to get in there and occupy these positions and have the votes, because if you don't have the votes, you can't win in a democracy.
Thank you, Lawrence. And last but certainly not least, Nick, please weigh in on this question of what your golden goose looks like.
Yeah, I think we need to look back to the closest analog to where we are today, which is the Great Depression. In the Great Depression, how did we get out of that? What did it take? You know, and this situation is arguably worse in a lot of ways, particularly because it's so pronounced, it's so sharp, it's so severe, it happens so quickly. And you have a record number of people who are threatening 1 out of every 10 Americans who could be evicted out of their homes unless action's taken. And the Democrats and Republicans couldn't bring themselves to come to an agreement in Congress. And they left town without it. So what is it going to take looking back to that? What did it take to get out of the Depression? It took Norman Thomas and the Socialist Party actually pressuring Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt, who was for most of his political career a fiscal conservative before running for the presidency. It took the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, coming together, exerting massive labor power, unlike anything that had been seen before in US history. It took gigantic labor strikes, including wildcat labor strikes. It took tens of thousands of people occupying the streets of Washington, D.C. across the Anacostia River. It was called the Bonus Army. Veterans who hadn't been paid in World War I. That's the scale of the activity that we need to push this country into a 21st century new social contract, like happened in the 30s. And when we take stock of where we are as a movement, we are not close to that. And we have to be honest with ourselves. We are not there. We're not there on the labor front. We're not there on the front of independent parties. We're not there on the front of direct action. And it needs to be all. It needs to be all of them. Farmaz put it very well when he said that. And that's why, as the Movement for a People's Party, it's built into our DNA, our philosophy, that we are building a movement party that combines electoral action with direct action and puts them together, because we don't think it's either or. We don't think they're mutually exclusive. We think we can and we must do both. And that's why we partnered, for example, with a number of different organizations, about a dozen, including Our Revolution chapters like Our Revolution Los Angeles, and Andrew Yang's Humanity Forward, former presidential candidate. And we partnered with them to host the Rally for a People's Stimulus just last month. And we went to the homes of more than 50 Democrats and Republicans together. And we protested outside their homes and demanded that they support Medicare for all, defunding the police, supporting student debt relief, putting people on payroll, and also a basic income, covering payroll for the government, which is what Europe did. Europe is not experiencing the catastrophe of unemployment and small business apocalypse that we are here. We did that, and we believe that that needs to be central to a party that we're building. And we can build an organization and a party, a movement party that does both, and we must.
Thanks, Nick. I think you're really pointing out how, and I really like how you spoke to the importance of, unions and the democratization of workplaces. And also, Lawrence, I really like how you brought up this idea of, having the votes for things. And I know that when I was in the education sector, or still am in the education sector, and you find out that as a public educator, your bosses are people who are voted on. And there are some educators that don't quite even understand that part of it, and that there are meetings twice a month where we're all being talked about. And it's not just from the worker standpoint, but it's also from the participants of the public. And one of the things that I've been most concerned about as an education activist is making what is sort of painfully invisible very visible to many people. I want to take a question. So we have a stack. First up is Eric. Eric Pierce, you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question? You have to get.
I am no longer seeing Eric in the room.
Oh, you don't? Okay, well
yeah.
Then move on next to Sharon. Thanks, Dennis. Sharon.
Hi, are you talking to me? Sorry.
I am. Hi, Sharon.
Sorry about that.
Fine.
What's going on here? Okay. Yeah, just wanted to explore with everybody how we can best reach out to independents in every state, because we know that there's a lot of people that want the things that we want, but they don't necessarily identify as Democrats, and they may not even know that they're progressives.
One of our panelists, Judith, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So in Nevada, there's actually quite a few. There's independence has been rapidly growing in registration numbers, and we're seeing that trend across the country because a lot of people don't identify as Democrat or Republican because neither party serves the needs of the people or quite fits with the values and principles of people around the nation. So we're seeing a growth in nonpartisan voters. And that's why I have advocated on issues for a long time and tried to drive that narrative to the Democratic Party as well. I formed an organization called Left Caucus. What we did was we chartered under the Democratic Party so that we can engage with our elected officials and so that we can establish a majority in the central committees through the Left Caucus. But we also are partnering with other organizations on legislative action as well. And I think that's where you start to reach nonpartisans, is when you partner on legislative actions and you're addressing the issues that are important in your communities. I mean, you start having those discussions and public forums and town halls, and you don't just limit it to Democratic circles. You have to open up that discussion and open up that engagement to include nonpartisans and non-voters. I mean, Bernie talked about that as well. I mean, a lot of people are just non-voters because you're too busy working 2 jobs or trying to earn a paycheck, and now you're worried about being evicted and you don't have health insurance. So it's kind of hard to have any time or energy to put into political debate. And of course, the powers that be, they know that. They absolutely are aware of that. These problems could all be resolved. They could all be addressed if there was a will to do so. And so that's what we're really fighting here, is making sure that we send people to Congress and that we have people running the party that actually have the will to get these things done. And that they don't just keep buying into the status quo because that's what gives them power.
Thank you, Judith. So I wanted to make sure that we hear from our audience and give everybody a chance to ask questions. So next up is Cheng Sim. You want to come off mute and ask your question to our panelists?
Yeah, hi. I want to ask the people who have been saying that, yes, you know, Judith, you saying inside-outside strategy. I understand that. But what is your faith in this inside part? Because now I was a no party preference person. I was not, you know, a Democrat. But Bernie Sanders brought me into the Democratic Party. Because of him, I registered as a Democrat. But as a Democrat, the only evidence I see all the time of where the party wants to go is it doesn't want people like me. I mean, you would think, right? They would welcome people like me who were, you know, no party preference into the party. Like welcome people like me with open arms. But I don't see that at all. I don't see any evidence of that. They keep chasing so-called, you know, moderate Republicans. The party's head is not there. And structurally, right, the party is controlled by money. It's like it's the donor class controls the money. Structurally, that's how the party is set up. How many people can you bring in, you know, sort of, you know, from the bottom up that can actually take control of the party? How long is that going to take? For me, I would much rather in this short period of time put my energy into putting the pressure from outside that can actually force, you know, the party to act or change or die, right? Because the parallel to me is if you know, without the outside force, we're gonna get these incremental changes, right, on the inside of the Democratic Party, which to me is the equivalent of the incremental changes that are killing us. We can't keep on having public option. We need Medicare for all. Like you got, you know, so why do you think these little incremental changes on the inside of the party is gonna make a difference? You know, I just don't see the evidence for all the effort put into the inside to, you know, we need a leap, but if we're just getting incremental changes, it's the equivalent of like, you know, not getting the Green New Deal and, you know, climate catastrophe, because we don't have the time. We don't have the time. And so I want to hear from the people who believe that you can make the change within the, you know, inside, where your faith comes from, because the evidence doesn't show me that.
Okay, so where does your faith come for the vision that you see? Does somebody want to address that directly?
Do you want me to take it? I'll take it.
I think Judith, I think we're going to hear from you, and I think we're also going to hear from Margie. So let's go like this. We're going to go Margie, Judith, and Laura. Okay, so we're going to address that question. Okay, Margie.
Okay. In 2016, there were only a couple people who ran for the County Central Committee for LACDP, okay? This time we have 32 people. That gives us 64 people in the room because of all their alternates, okay? So now we need to have a supermajority of people ready to go to run for LACDP in 4 years, because ours is a 4-year stint. In the meantime, next January, we have the ADEM elections here in California that we need to sweep. Okay, that's 7 people plus an executive board person, and that's for the state central committee. If we organize, if we tell people this is how you take power from the party, is by getting us elected to make policy for the party itself. That's how we win.
Okay, Judith.
Yes, she's right. But going back to the original question, it's not an either or thing. And if your faith is not in the inside of the party, then I would encourage you to work on the outside of the party. So here in Nevada, Left Caucus works very closely with the local Las Vegas chapter of the DSA. We formed coalitions. We work in partnership on a lot of different things with the goal of removing the obstruction and electing leftist candidates here in Nevada. So this was not an incremental change. In 2016, the reason I have faith is because in 2016, when I was a Bernie delegate here in Nevada, afterwards there was this like huge rage or outcry from Bernie delegates, but there was no real action taken to make change. So a group of us that were committed to making change, we didn't want to miss this opportunity when it came to 2020 to engage people during the campaign and during the caucus to convention process. So basically we kept organized and actively engaged over 4,000, close to 5,000 Bernie delegates right here in Clark County, which is the Vegas area. We were able to do that by keeping them engaged on the issues and making changes to the platform. And then at that point, we kept them going forward through the convention process so that now we have the majority on our county central committee, and we elected a majority to our state central committee. So out of 695 members of the state central committee, 400 are Bernie delegates. That's a huge change in a short amount of time. And the key here was being actively organized and knowing that we're doing it to make change. We're not doing it to be part of the status quo. Then we ran a progressive slate for the election for state party executive board positions, and we won 9 out of 10. We're about to go into another election for county board seats as well, where we expect to win because we have a majority there. We have also found that we're much better at grassroots activism than the establishment is, because they're used to just having loyal Democratic voters who just do what they're told. That's the way it's been for years. The power elite, the people, the establishment that's been in control, that's where the whole vote blue no matter who bullshit came from, was, okay, we're waiting for the party leaders to tell us what to do. Well, we don't buy into that. We're not going to buy into that. So even though it seems like it's been incremental change because we've been fighting this battle for so long, I have faith from what I've seen on the ground, working inside and outside, that we are heading toward transformative change, but it's going to take all of us working together. And it is going to have to be a massive movement. And we need to remove all of this obstruction so that we can pave a way for a third party rise. And I'm all in favor of that. I don't have a problem with that. But the reason it hasn't been effective to date is because they haven't been able to gain enough traction. There's only a surge in membership during a national election. They've made some minor gains on the local level. They have some chapters across the country, but they don't actually really truly align with the values and principles of all progressives and leftists either. There have been some problems in the past with some of their positions. So, and it hasn't felt like an organic, well, I'm sorry, but that's true, like the anti-vax thing. So there hasn't been an organic movement from the bottom into the Green Party. It's been like the Green Party's been there forever. Come join us. But yet it hasn't felt like a movement of the people. So I think that's been the problem with that. But the other problem is because of the way the system is and that it is so corrupt, and the two-party system has been the way the two parties have worked together to obstruct the rise of a third party. So if we get rid of the structure and the opposition, we have to look at it as taking out our opponent. That's how we have to look at the Democratic Party. We're going to take out our opponent, we're going to take over, and then we're going to open it up.
Okay, thank you, Judith. We're going to go Laura, and then Lawrence, and then Nick.
Okay, I think that one of the things that we can do is look to see what it is that the billionaires want us to do and don't do that. Because the problem actually is it's a concentration of wealth and power, but really it's a concentration of power. And wealth buys you that. And what the billionaires buy with their billions, they can't buy enough jets and islands and parties. They buy power. And so they buy politicians, which runs relatively cheap to the amount of money that they have. And they buy media. And the media can make people think, Tina, there is no alternative. You've got to stay with the Titanic parties, the huge parties that promises that you're going to have a cruise, and then you run into the leaders, the captains are running straight into the iceberg and not turning aside. Whereas the Green Party, an alternative, independent, progressive party, is like a lifeboat. The more people that come into it, the larger it gets. So it has that unique quality. So when the billionaires want you to stay in, even in a deep blue state like California, they want you to continue to vote for one of those two parties. But if you do not obey what the billionaires and their media and their bought out Democratic Party leadership, if you don't do what they want you to do and give a boost to the existing party. Right now, we've got the Green Party. In the future, we might have a party with a different name, who knows? But right now, the no corporate money ever, which means no billionaire money party, is the Green Party. So why not use all the power that you have in your little vote, not to just say, okay, Biden, but to say, no, not good enough. I'm voting green so that you know these are the values that we want. In a state like California, there is no risk. Why not?
Thank you, Laura. I can't remember if I said Lawrence or Nick next, so I think I'm going to just go with whoever unmutes quickest and start speaking. Lawrence? Oh, Lawrence, you're muted.
Am I off mute now?
Now you have a hot mic.
Okay. So the reason why I am optimistic is because we have made just astonishing advances. If you see what happened in Alabama with the work that Selena Vickers did, she turned in the Alabama State Party to the DNC, and even though it was the last thing they wanted to do, she actually made them force Alabama to redo their elections. They had an entrenched group of people who, when they ran for re-election, got voted out. They voted in a activist young Black chair. And what has happened to the party is that it has expanded and blossomed. Suddenly people want to get active in the Alabama Democratic Party. Their contributions from people have exponentiated, and they're now in a far better place than they ever have been. So it's successes like that, and the successes of like what Judith has described in Nevada that show us that this really can be done. But we have to do this in all of the states. And the only thing I'd like to add is that, you know, people like to be nice and get along and don't like discord, but this is about taking power away from a group of people that has has hoarded it for decades, and it is going to be a struggle because they're not going to say, oh, please just take the power away from me. We have to take the power away from them, and it's not going to be pretty.
Thank you, Lawrence. Nick, thank you.
So when we stand up to the oligarchy and demand basic human rights and policies that the rest of the world takes for granted, like Medicare for all, Canada's had Medicare for all type, single payer type system in some form for last half a century. Which argument do we think is more effective? Give us change now, but if you don't, we'll stay with you and begrudgingly vote for you anyways, as much as we hate it. Or give us change now, and if you don't, we're going to replace your party and the Republican Party and everything it represents. We think that making that existential threat and taking the pressure to the highest possible level is the only way that we're going to create progressive change, whether that comes in the form in the end of a major new party, like a People's Party, or whether it comes in the form of actually forcing the Democrats to change. It's going to take that outside pressure, because this is the logic of monopolies. As long as the establishment knows that they have our votes regardless and that we have nowhere to go, then they can treat us like Biden has. 3 weeks ago, Biden told his donors in a teleconference, a fundraising teleconference hosted with Blackstone executive. He said, you all need to change. We need change in corporate America. But don't worry, because it's not going to take any legislation, and I'm not proposing any, to reform Wall Street. And then his campaign shamelessly blasted that announcement out to the national media. They have no shame anymore. It's not even like it was in 2008. I remember volunteering for Barack Obama's campaign. It's not like that anymore, where they don't even pretend. They don't even pretend anymore. And so that's what we believe is going to be an effective argument. When you look at what's happening around the world now, there's something happening around the world which is so underreported in the United States. In Mexico, progressives got fed up with their two establishment parties, their neoliberal, the center left and the center right, and they formed Morena. Within 4 years of forming the party, they had swept out the presidency, the majority of the governors, both houses of the national legislature. That's what a political revolution looks like. It doesn't, unfortunately, in the Democratic Party in 2018, for example, just to give you one example, the number of corporate Democrats in Congress that were unseated by progressives was 2. AOC and Ayanna Pressley. We can have a trickle of progressives coming in, but it doesn't change the overall system. And the system, in fact, begins to work on them, and it begins to change them. And that's a sociological reality. It has nothing to do with their integrity. It has nothing to do with, how honest they were or their intentions coming in. But the reality is that, for example, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came into Congress, she was saying, we're going to do wholesale challenges of corporate Democrats, just across the board, primaries all over the place. And we're going to form a corporate free caucus. And we're going to replace Nancy Pelosi as speaker. We're going to challenge her. Well, 2 years later, what happened with the speaker's race is, first of all, the Democratic Party said, that's funny. If you try to replace Nancy Pelosi, we'll replace her with someone even more conservative, Tim Ryan, because Nancy Pelosi is actually to the left of the party in Congress, of left of center, as corporate as she is, having enriched herself to the tune of $100 million in public office. And then what happened is that 2 years from then, AOC no longer has plans, as was reported in Politico a couple months ago, to form a corporate free caucus. How in the world are we supposed to actually change the Democratic Party or any corporate party without getting corporate money out of it? So something's happening around the world. In Mexico, it happened. It's not just there, though. It's happening in Latin America. It's happening in Europe. New parties are rising. They're digitally savvy. It's a new generation. They're on the left, and they are displacing and seriously contesting center-left parties. It's happening in France, in the UK, in Italy, in Greece, in Spain, in Germany. And we have the opportunity to do the same here. We don't have to continue to submit to these two parties.
Well, and I certainly want to take this moment to make sure that everyone knows that yellow vests are available at your local hardware store. Very cost efficient. So I want to take a question from the audience. I have Jenny, who has been in the queue and very patiently waiting. And thank you everyone to the audience for being very patient while we all go through this new convention style of Zoom. So Jenny, are you unmuted? Are you ready for your question?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Yes. So thanks for all the speakers. And honestly, personally, I was a Green Party in 2016, and I'm ready to move on to a new party. And I really like what Nick says and the People's Party and what they stand for. My question is to Nick, are we able to select a presidential candidate from People's Party in November? And what does it take for you guys to put someone on the ballot? And what does it take for you guys to be on the debate stage, you know, with the national televised debates? Because I honestly believe working with a lot of regular people, they have no clue what's available to them. They don't own their own power. They're merely sheeps and whatever, you know, MSBM wants to tell them, and they're just not aware. I think if we can get you guys on the ballot and also get you guys on national TV, I mean, I would do whatever it takes to help. Can you guys speak upon that?
Should I answer that?
Please.
Okay, so thanks. First of all, thanks so much for your support. And really glad to hear that. And so it takes nationally, it takes about 1 million signatures to get on the ballot, to get ballot access nationwide in various different states. In the vast majority of states, you have to collect thousands of signatures in order to get on the ballot. In California, in some other states like California, you have to achieve a certain registration number of registered party members. In California, it's 65,000 that you have to achieve. So very doable. Also, that would allow us to have a presidential candidate in 2024, forming a major new party. It would also allow us to run locally and at the congressional level in federal races in 2022, in the midterms. And those early victories, you know, especially by focusing strategically in areas where we can run really compelling candidates that are rooted in their communities, that stand for everything that we need right now as a country, we can get some early victories that are proof of concept and that showcase to everyone, wow, the establishment and the duopolies shield of basically invulnerability has been shattered. And now we can overtake it in 2024. And this is how it was done. Not exactly like this, but this is what actually happened in our own history in the 1850s, when the Whig Party betrayed its base, passed a pro-slavery platform in the election of 1852, their national convention of 1852, when most of the Whig Party was at the time solidly abolitionist. And they rejected that, and 2 years later, they founded the Republican Party. And within 6 years, they had elected Abraham Lincoln, taken the Senate, taken Congress, and completely replaced the Whig Party. And so just like happened in Mexico, it took 4 years. This change, when people are ready for the change at the level that they're at now, it can happen very quickly.
Thank you, Nick. I want to keep taking some questions from folks that have been hanging out with
Can
us.
I wait?
Laura,
Can I
would you like
wait on
to?
that for a
Please.
second? Okay, first of all, I applaud the People's Party and the Green Party and anybody else that's an activist or an organizer or is trying to do the work. Because like I said before, it has to be a coalition of people trying to make change. But I do think it's a little naive to think that you're going to be on the ballot or up on the debate stage without years and hundreds of thousands of dollars yourself. And I think that that could change, and it wouldn't take that if we were able to remove some of the obstruction on your path to creating another party. And again, I do think we need more parties. We need multiple parties that represent the people. But you're not gonna do it by being social media or digital warriors. It's going to have to be a massive movement of the people. And when you cite other countries, like what's happening around the world, they already have a different system, and also those people are willing to take to the streets. If you lose some vacation benefits in Spain, those people are out in the streets. They don't put up with that, and that's one of the things we've been lacking here in this country, is being able to get people mobilized as a massive movement. We keep talking about it, but we haven't been able to get to that point yet. And once we get to that point, and if we've removed the obstruction in front of us, then all bets are off, and everything opens up for the rise of other parties.
Okay, so next question comes from Christian. Christian? Gonna give you a second to unmute, and then I'm gonna move to the next person.
Can we call on Mary? She's had her hand up for a very long time.
Okay, I don't see Christian. Mary.
Thank you. Yeah, I lost power. I had to log back in. My question has to do with, people have been saying inside, outside, electoral politics, electing. I think electoral politics has been mostly focusing on electing candidates. And I do agree that electing local people, it makes a lot of sense. I'm a local activist myself and have been working on city council and supervisor races. But the other avenue, which I feel the folks haven't explored too much, progressives, is using, in states like California and Western states, the ballot, direct democracy, propositions and initiatives. In our county, San Benito and also Monterey, we were able to ban fracking, and even though we were outspent 18-1 by Chevron and other companies. And I think because we engage in very real deep grassroots campaigns. So I feel like, maybe Medicare for All could be the vehicle in this, instead of waiting for our politicians, it could be forever, to change. I think that we should probably explore a state proposition, because if really 80% or so people are supporting this, why can't we, win through a proposition that will really terrify the elected officials? Why don't we use the electoral, direct democracy, the ballot, propositions and local initiatives? What do you think of that as a vehicle to help, whichever party you're with, move much faster?
I think it's an excellent vehicle. Here in Nevada, we've been very successful with ballot initiatives. That's why marijuana is legalized here in Nevada, was with the ballot initiative. That's why there's tighter gun legislation here in Nevada with a ballot initiative. We've used it quite successfully here. And we actually are pursuing a state strategy for Medicare for All here in Nevada. That's one of our big goals. And we're working on a state-by-state strategy for that as well. And the other thing that we should look at, if we're going to advocate for a third party or the rise of the third party, is doing a ballot initiative for ranked choice voting. Because effectively, if you get ranked choice voting in every state, you're starting to really open the door for a third party. So there's a lot that we can do with the power of the ballot. And I agree, direct democracy is a way to move things faster as well.
Would any of our other panelists like to jump in on this, on the statewide proposition and agency within? Laura, please.
I want to give a real quick one for California has Prop 15, a strong yes on Prop 15, because California, to its shame, started the tax revolt 2 years before Reagan took office, the tax revolt that helped the super rich. And Prop 15 reforms the good old 1978 Prop 13 by making the corporations pay their fair share in property tax. So yes, initiatives, work for those, and work for alternatives across the board.
Laura, do you want to weigh in on ranked choice voting as a
Ranked choice voting, I live in Oakland, California, and we're one of the cities that has ranked choice voting, and we got it in 2006 in a coalition working together with a lot of League of Women Voters and all the parties, including Republican and Democrat, and and Green and Peace and Freedom and Libertarian. So yeah, and San Francisco was just a couple of years before that. I think they were the first ones. Maine has got it now as a state, ranked choice voting, and there's Lisa Savage is running against the Susan Collins, who was a Republican that was supposedly okay, but so it would be wonderful if that happens. We'll have a Green in Congress.
Thank you. Okay, so next question from the audience. Christian, your button is working now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just a moment. I had a question. How will the People's Party, DSA, Green Party, and PDPR fight for the rural working class non-affiliated voters? And what is your stance on using the original populist People's Party tools like the Farmers Alliance and Granges to make changes on a local level?
Christian, is there a particular panelist you'd like to hear from first?
It does not matter.
Oh my goodness. Well then, I guess it's a free-for-all. Who would like to take that first? Nick, would you like to?
Yes, but I missed a bit of the question. I'm sorry. Could you restate it?
Christian? Do you want to restate your question for him? Oh my goodness, where did he go? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are. Go ahead.
Okay. So the question was, how will you all fight for the rural working class non-affiliated voters, and what is your stance on using the original populist People's Party tools like the Farmers Alliance and Granges to make changes on a local level?
That is following what the People's Party and progressive parties of the early 20th century did and the late 19th century. And so that's exactly the kind of thing that we are looking to do, is to mobilize people who are not necessarily in cities to fight for things like universal broadband on top of the universal programs like Medicare for All and free public college that are going to help people across the country. And also for unaffiliated voters, you bring out that someone else brought up earlier that there are a lot of the independents are rising, and that's very much true. Independents are about 45% of the country now. Gallup keeps a monthly kind of poll running, and Democrats and Republicans, those who affiliate as Democrats and Republicans, are about 27% each. And so that is really where people are, in addition to non-voters. Most people who've just simply given up on voting as a whole, because they don't see a point. They make a rational calculation that their vote doesn't make a difference, because whether you have a Democrat or Republican, the inequality is going to increase, the cost of healthcare is going to increase, you know, your wage is going to stagnate or decline, and you're not going to see healthcare become more affordable. The wars are going to continue. It's all going to continue. And so by offering substantive difference from that, then we think that we can mobilize millions of people who aren't even in the two parties, because compared to other countries, as you allude to, the US has a very low rate of participation in our elections, in both in presidentials and even worse in midterms. And as far as the People's Party term, that is certainly something that we could keep. We're going to vote on a final name later on as a membership, and we're also going to vote on a final platform. The membership will at the founding convention.
Thank you, Nick. I want to take another question from the audience, and the next person we have on stack is Ron. Ron Birnbaum. Yes. Yeah, no, you're telling me no, your hand's up. Oh, he's passing. Well, Nina, you're next then.
All right, thank you. Sorry, let me show my video. Hello. So my question is, we know that corporate media has a huge impact on our ability to affect change within electoral politics or outside. How are you strategically doing to overcome this? And where do you think independent media fits into this? And also, how do you think we progressives need to use media to our advantage? So I just think that media is really important. So I just want to know, whatever your strategy is, what are you doing to overcome this?
Is there a particular panelist you'd like to hear from? No, just in general? I don't know what a TikTok is, and I know I don't want to do it.
It's a video thing.
I don't want to know. Laura, do you want to answer on this one?
I will say that is one of the reasons why the Green Party has to run for president at the same time that we're running at local races. It's not either or, you know, we need to do both. But Jill Stein was somebody who broke into some of the alternative media outlets that she could. She was on Democracy Now! A few times. They had even a real-time debate, you know, where they had Jill Stein at the same time that there was the Democrat and Republican debate, Larry King and some others. But it's really hard because really, I think if Eisenhower were to say it again, he might say something like the military, industrial, banking, pharmaceutical, insurance, media complex is a real tough thing. And so, yes, there are people who have come into, who have done Green Enter and have particularly, folks that have come in as Green Enter have brought in a lot of skills in social media, and we need social media and we need whatever we can do. There are editorial boards that have made explicit decisions to never cover an alternative. So they keep that Tina, there is no alternative in people's minds. Over.
Lawrence? And then we're going to go Lawrence and then Judith. Lawrence, you're muted.
So this show is actually being restreamed by Uphill Media, and that is an independent media organization that's been active since 2016. It is it's like a partner to PDPR, and it's the organization that we use to create our programs and do our live stream broadcasting. We are also exploring getting into low power FM, which will become a conduit for multiple programs to other low power FM stations across rural America. So this gets back to Christian's comment about what can be done for rural America. So yes, that is what we are doing. We're working in a system that completely avoids the corporate media structure.
Thank you, Lawrence. Judith?
Well, that's what we're doing here in Nevada as well, is creating our own progressive media outlets. It's getting to be where most progressives, but even a lot of non-voters and non-partisans are turning to those media outlets for news and information, because there's a basic distrust of corporate media around the country, and for good reason. I remember when Trump first started attacking the media, everybody was up in arms, the Democratic Party was up in arms, but a lot of people, the average person, sat back and said, the media isn't actually, they're not actually made up of journalists anymore. They're not reporting the news anymore. They're a bunch of talking heads and paid lobbyists that are up there to promote a certain position for a certain candidate or a certain party. People are turning to other sources for news and information. So that's where we have to start capitalizing what's already a natural and organic process, and start being better at getting our information out through those sources as well. We try to publicize those things really frequently here and share progressive media information and articles and everything within our organizations. The other thing we are looking at is doing that on a local basis as well. Because right now, you know, we have the Las Vegas Review Journal and one online paper, and that's kind of it for print. And then, you know, our news stations obviously are owned by their corporate masters, so you have to find ways to circumvent that. There used to be a thing called the Fairness Doctrine that used to hold our media accountable. There used to be a division between the news department and the rest of the entertainment, you know, the rest of the channel, the rest of the news media, the rest of the media corporation. There used to be a distinct division between the news and the rest of the corporation. That's all gone away. All we hear is a person's opinion when we turn on the news, CNN included. So we're not getting actual news, and we have to really be more effective at combating that. But the Democratic Party wasn't doing a good job of it either, because you heard a lot of Republican messaging over the years. We let Fox News become extremely prominent. And the MSNBC definitely wasn't the answer to that. So we've got to do a better job at that as well. But we've got to also work with other organizations and getting the media, getting the news out and the information out, starting on a local basis and putting more and more press releases out. Larry mentioned Uphill Media. A lot of those organizations are working to give a voice to progressives. That's their sole extent. So we've got to get better at that. We've got to work together on that and get the message out.
Thank you so much. Isaac, I know you've been waiting patiently, and I want to give you a chance to ask your question. Are you ready?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. I have a couple of questions, quick questions, primarily for people organizing outside of the Democratic Party. But before we can conscientiously fight for a new party, Green, MPP, or otherwise, we need to correct the structural strangleholds that the two parties have implemented. Personally, I think that PDA and our revolution have the best approach, which is to work both inside and outside the Democratic Party. Working inside to take over the Democratic Party as PDPR is also helping to make the Democratic Party once again the party of Eleanor and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and work outside the party to build a movement that's big enough and strong enough to hold the electeds accountable. If people just cannot stomach joining us to do that, the inside the party part, I get it. But in that case, the only three methods that I know of to resolve the stranglehold are 1, ranked choice voting, 2, fusion voting, and 3, proportional representation. So my question to anyone working to organize parties outside of the duopoly, 1, have you read Bill McKibben's letter to the Greens in the New Yorker magazine about ranked choice voting? And 2, what are you doing to solve the several layers of impediments to your success? Thank you. Looking forward to the answers.
Excellent. Thank you. Nick, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Thank you.
And so in other countries, they enjoy more multi-party systems because they have a structure that is set up to enable that and to help support that. They have ranked choice voting, as you brought up. They also have multi-member districts. We need those changes in the United States, undoubtedly. We believe that we can form a major new party now without those changes and to implement them, because you kind of have this chicken and the egg problem that is like, okay, well, we need those parties to have, you know, those structural changes to have a multi-party system, but the Democrats and Republicans are never going to make those structural changes because it helps entrench their power. And so what we believe is that we can break through and then implement those and then turn the United States into a multi-party system. And there's great progress being made. I would urge everyone to check out Voter Choice Massachusetts. As was mentioned, we have the first state in the country has passed ranked choice voting. That's Maine. The Democrats and Republicans fought it viciously. It only passed by initiative. The people passed it, and then the legislature, both parties tried to repeal it, and then the people they initiated a process called the citizens veto, and they overrode the legislature again, and so they managed to keep it. And now in Massachusetts, there is a second statewide effort that is going to be on the ballot in 2020 for ranked choice voting, and that's the direction that we need to go.
Laura?
So the Green Party has been avidly working toward electoral reform. And actually, there's been a lot of electoral reform because people love to see that on the ballot and they vote for it. Unfortunately, the initiatives have all been going in the wrong direction, like Top 2 here in California, but it sounded like it was going to be open primary. And that's how it was sold. Here's a story about San Francisco had at some point 5 or 6 Greens on the City Council Board of Supervisors, since it's the city and county of San Francisco. On that board, there were Greens and on the school boards. And it went from 5 or 6 to where it was 4 or 5 switched to the Democrats. This was shortly after 2003 when Matt Gonzalez very nearly won as mayor of San Francisco, which would have been so wonderful for our country. But what happened was that the Democratic Party, I believe, of California determined that whether you're Progressive Democrats of America or whatever, if you were a Democratic Party club, you could no longer endorse outside of the Democrats, which means if there was a very good progressive candidate in the very progressive city of San Francisco, they could not be endorsed, and then the union leadership follows, again, make a difference between the rank and file and the leadership, and so on. And so what happened was that then anybody, in order to stay in office, flipped over to Democrats. Now, that is how the inside of the Democratic Party has been dealing with electoral reform. And then fast forward to 2019, 16 years later, Gavin Newsom, who won by a hair's breadth mayor in 2003 against Green Matt Gonzalez, had passed by the legislature a bill that would have made it much easier to pass ranked choice voting across the state of California. He vetoed it because he said it's too confusing and people will, it'll be too confusing for the voters. Okay, so that's what we're up against, but you bet. Green Party has proportional representation. 90 countries in the world have that. What's up with our democracy 101? We need an upgrade.
Okay, so I want to get lightning round because we're at 15, we're over time, but it's such a good discussion. It doesn't seem like anybody wants to stop talking. Far be it for me to get in your way. So I want to take another question. Kayla, you've been waiting so patiently. Kayla, will you unmute and ask your question to our panelists? This time we're going to let one panelist respond. So if there's a panelist that you want to speak to your question, please let them know. And take it away, Kayla.
Yeah, I think this is going to be more for around like the Democrats. So because of the momentum of people like Bernie, of Trump, of a lot of populist MPPs and everyone, how are we going to try and push establishment Democrats out by fueling progressive multiracial populism as a new backbone for the Democratic Party, assuming that that is the direction that the country decides to go in?
Okay, so do one of our panelists want to directly answer that one?
I think I understand the question. So we've seen the corrupt practices of the Democratic Party, such as the blackballing of consultants who worked for challengers to incumbents. That was done by the DCCC. You know, the changes to the bylaws of the Democratic Party that will ban those sorts of practices and anything else that is anti-democratic will only happen is if we amend the bylaws themselves to get rid of those practices. If you read the preamble of the Democratic Party, it is very altruistic and very inclusive, and from that section it goes downhill, and that's where you get all of the anti-democratic things that have been built into the bylaws, and that's what we are trying to root out. We submitted three resolutions to the Convention Bylaws Committee because they could actually propose those changes and pass them on the convention floor next week, but none of them were even allowed to be aired inside the committee itself. And so we now have to go back and do the more arduous task of electing DNC members to the DNC who pledge themselves to democracy, and then getting them to vote for the changes that would ban those sorts of practices.
Thank you, Lawrence. Okay, next question is from Rick. Rick, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, seeing as we're on a lightning round, I'm going to change my question. I would like everyone that said ranked choice voting to take a look at STAR. I'm here in New Hampshire and was active in that part there, and a lot of those complaints had validity, and that validity was negated with the STAR voting if they change it from ranked choice voting, in my opinion. But here's the point. I think we have to act quicker than anyone's suggesting here so far, in that we stand, the moratoriums run out, the healthcare close to 26 million. I mean, it keeps changing. Is it 26 million or is it 40 million? A lot of people could end up homeless and without health care very, very soon. Never mind the planet. We don't have 10 years to wait. So that being said, I think I want to point it to Nick, because I believe Nick is actually taking steps and actions to address this in a quick fashion.
What was your question? Oh, you're muted.
What are you doing to address these problems immediately? Like next month, next week, the month after, not down the road, now.
As the Movement for a People's Party, we took direct action, and it's going to take a lot more of that. And I know we talked about that earlier in the panel, but we believe that it's absolutely essential to get in the streets. And we saw the largest movement. The New York Times reported it as the largest movement in US history, protest movement, as the Black Lives Matter movement. And that happened in response to the murder of George Floyd. And so you can see how change can happen very quickly. We can go from decades where nothing happens to weeks where decades happen. And in fact, we lived it in June. And we can't, because the country has reached a point, particularly with the way that the coronavirus crisis has been handled in the United States, where people are ready for that. And so a combination of direct action, while at the same time building an electoral vehicle that can carry us to challenge, within the electoral system, is we think, a winning combination. And that is the kind of thing that it took also to get us out of the Great Depression.
Part of what I really like about this and the answer is it sort of echoes to back when we started this conversation about inside, outside, in, out, fast, slow, and it turns out that it's all of it. Justin, you're next.
Okay. Hold on a second. Oh, okay. There you go. Yeah, thank you. Okay, hi. So I actually ran for state senator here in California under the Democratic banner, just because, as Laura mentioned, that was probably the only way I would get any sort of traction, despite the fact that, I also learned that the Democratic establishment didn't really take kindly to my progressive ideas. But my question really is this. So we now have Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee. And despite the fact that a majority of Democratic voters support the idea of Medicare for all, support the idea of a Green New Deal, support the idea of legalizing cannabis, he flatly rejects each and every one of those positions. So I'm going to throw this question to either Lawrence or Judith. What kind of concrete steps can we take? Because everyone talks about holding politicians accountable, and we hear this cliche all the time. We're going to hold their feet to the fire. We're going to hold their feet to the fire. But it seems as though it's basically rhetoric, because when it comes down to it, no one really seems to want to do anything. So, and it seems like asking pretty please to someone like Biden to support Medicare for all is really falling on deaf ears. So is there any concrete action we can take to make sure he does adopt this? Or is it one of those, you know what, just suck it up and vote for him because Trump?
Judith, I say that you're not muted. Do you want to go on this one?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, I would never tell anybody how to vote. I don't believe in that. Each person has to make that decision for themselves. And I hate the fact that Democrats, that their whole campaign message seems to be a long anti-Trump commercial, and that they're not getting back to the issues and policies that actually would help people. And I don't believe that Biden is going to budge on those issues. I think our best is a pressure campaign on Harris, because we've already seen her act as a weather vane. She been sort of soft on some of the things that Biden supports and firm on others, but she changes her direction according to public opinion a lot. And I think that that's a pressure point for us to use. I also think, like I said before, I just gave you an example of what was happening here in Nevada, where they were trying to enact a gag rule on progressives and trying to prohibit us from working on progressive campaigns. But we have the majority to outvote them and to vote that down. And as we start to take more and more positions within those state and county central committees, then we get to make the decisions and remove the obstruction. A lot of our legislators actually, in talking with many of them, a lot of them at the state level actually agree with these issues, actually are proponents and advocates for these issues like Medicare for all. But traditionally, progressives have not shown up in the numbers needed when we get a state legislator to agree to carry a bill. We have to be there to get their back, is what it amounts to. We have to give them cover, because otherwise, the party's going to come after them in the next election. They're going to find themselves at the wrong end when it comes election time. They're going to get cut off from the resources, cut off from ban, cut off from the things they need to win their election. They'll be blacklisted. So we have to start showing up. And that's one thing that we have not been good at as a whole, as a country, is showing up. Nick keeps talking about direct action, but direct action is only effective if it's a massive amount of people, like the recent Black Lives Matter protests. Are we seeing some reform? Yes, but not a real attack on the inherent racism and the systemic racism that exists and permeates through our government and through our society and through our healthcare and everything else. Yes, there's some small reforms being done, but again, there was a catalyst for that. So in any big, huge protest like that, there's always been a catalyst for it. So where do we find the catalyst to get people here in this country to start being out in the streets? I hope it's not going to take another death to do that. I think that we've got to find those pressure points, and we've got to apply constant direct pressure at every point we can find, every chink in the armor that we can find. I don't think that it's going to be Biden, though. I think that it's going to be through Harris and through our state legislators and through the people that we send to Congress to start applying that pressure with us and start standing with the people again. And if they know that we're going to actually show up, you'll find a lot more legislators are actually in agreement with us.
Thank you, Judith. John Seeley, you're next with your question.
Well, I'm just wondering whether people look, whether, the panelists have looked carefully at the Republican Party and the methods that certain elements use to defeat the establishment in their party and what we can learn from that. And also, I'd like to specifically ask, there's a lot of talk about pressure, which sometimes people confuse with petitioning. But, I mean, is there any pressure that's less important than defeating corporate Democrats in primaries? And do you think we should go as far, in the case of the House, where we have some people to spare, do you think we should go as far as trying to, defeat some corporate Dems this year in November, even if Republicans, pick up a few seats?
Okay, so lessons from the other side of the aisle. Anybody want to tackle this? Lawrence or Laura? Judith, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in on that. I am a big advocate for primary challenges. And when you go back to somebody had mentioned about, we talk big about holding people accountable, but then we don't take the action to go along with the words. That's one way you take action and hold elected officials accountable, is that they know if they don't answer the people or stand for the people or represent their constituents, there's going to be a primary challenger there ready to take their place. But you have to have a system in place and the structure in place to win. If you're going to do that and to keep the movement going and keep people engaged, there has to be some wins. You can't keep putting people up just to put people up. And then if we're not winning any of those races, then we're effectively rendering ourselves null and void. We won't have any power. So we have to be smarter and more strategic about it. We have to take on races that we know we can win, and we have to start putting people up, recruiting the right candidates. And here what we're doing in Nevada is forming like an endorsement panel of progressive coalition organizations, where we're working with the Clark County Black Caucus, we're working with the Latinx community through Make the Road Nevada, we're working with the DSA, we're working with lots of other organizations, the Sunrise Movement, so that we're all working together and combining our resources to get that person elected, and that we have the resources to have the ground game to get out the vote and engage people on the level that you need to get those people elected.
Okay, our last question is going to come from Ron. Oh, unmute yourself, Ron.
Okay, there we go.
Almost. Ron's having trouble with the mute and unmute button, which happens in Zoom, as we've all become very familiar and aware.
Oh, no, it looks like I'm unmuted.
You're back. You're back. You're here.
Okay.
You never
I had
left.
no idea what was going on there. I've done so much Zoom. I have no excuse.
It happens. Go for it.
I did it.
Actually, I wanted to make a reading recommendation and then ask a question. And so the reading recommendation is a book that I read a while ago called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty by a thinker named A.O. Hirschman, who reflected on organizations that have had trouble and the decisions that people make to leave them or stay in them. And he even looked at political parties and asked that. And one of it's a great book. One of the conclusions of that book is sort of that sometimes they're very personal, emotional decisions why people come or go, exit, enter, or whatever, but that often people who do have some similar goals. And I suspect that that's true here. And so the question I wanted to ask people on the panel is what they thought about this organization called the California Progressive Alliance. I've been a member of it, but not participated a lot with it. Sort of like if they see alliance and sort of umbrella as a more important strategy than party identity battles.
Okay, Laura, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to live in Oakland, which is just a city or two over from Richmond. And so I've been inspired by them a lot and worked with them a lot. And that was the Richmond Progressive Alliance was what started, and then it was the California Progressive Alliance started a couple of years ago. And Gail McLaughlin, when she was mayor, was the Green Party elected official of the biggest city in the country that had a Green mayor. And the thing that they have in common, and it's the same thing that Nick Branna is talking about and that I'm talking about, no corporate money. At the city level, that's no developer money, because the developers buy out the city councils just as the huge corporations buy out the nation and the medium-sized corporations buy out the states. And so so I think very highly of it. No corporate money, no corporate money, no corporate money. And my favorite election ever in the world was when Chevron, which is the biggest corporation in California, and Chevron has a refinery right there in Richmond, they put in like $3 million against 3 Richmond Progressive Alliance candidates and 2 others that were sort of better than the others. And they lost, and lost all 5. My favorite election ever.
I love the fact that you have a favorite election ever. I feel like everyone needs a favorite election ever. My favorite election ever, I just want to throw it out there because, you know, I get to be a facilitator and I love listening to everybody talk. Thank you so much for coming to this panel and having this discussion. This topic is in particular really important to me because of how important it is to activate within democracy in the spaces that you have available to you. My favorite election was a union election that I was part of, where I won a seat that I shouldn't have won. I was an underdog and a progressive in my values, and it was hard, and I somehow won it. And I just hope whoever's listening to this, not just the folks in the room, but out there in the world, whatever it is that you want to do and be, I hope that you can find a way to be active and organize those around you to help carry you through that journey, because we certainly don't do any of this by ourselves. So I just want to take a second. Thank you to the panelists. I'm quiet clapping because of microphones and how awkward it is. And I'm going to turn it over to someone who's not me.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you. We are coming to the closing of our day 1 of our 2-day shadow convention. And we want to thank you, our audience members. We have 94 people here. We've been streaming live on YouTube and the rest of social media. And so we thank you for participating. We thank you for being here. I do want to give a quick rundown of what is to come for tomorrow, our 2nd day of action, and I will read this from my monitor here. Well, thank you, Lauren, for putting that up. We do have at 10 p.m. to 1 Eastern Time, we have a live rally and caravan at Men's Central Jail, Los Angeles. 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. live peace billboard rally in Wisconsin. 1:30 Pacific time to 4:30 remarks from Congressman Ro Khanna and Congresswoman Barbara Lee. We shared Barbara's video with us. She unfortunately cannot be here with us in person, but she has sent a very heartfelt message to all of our delegation. For the afternoon panels, we do have a 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. People's Budget. It actually is supposed to say—
That's just the Eastern time.
Yeah,
sorry.
Eastern time. Got it. No problem. It's 2 to 3:20 actually. That will feature Dr. Melina Abdullah, who is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, as well as Kat Brooks. And we do have Gus Newport, who happens to also be a delegate and former mayor of Berkeley. At 3:30 Pacific time to 6:30 Eastern time, we have prison reform and abolition. 5 p.m. to 8 Eastern Time, we have U.S. Foreign Policy and Demilitarization. And we do have a group of fantastic speakers participating. And we do have a panel after that on climate change, which our very own Igor has put together. Thank you so much for participating, everybody. We will share the Zoom link for you all to register. And just join us tomorrow the same way. We will be live streaming. The schedule of our event is also available for you on social media to take a look at. And we hope to see you all tomorrow.
Yes. And just to add, that we do have a poll that I've been posting, and if you can take that poll, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Sudhi. Have a good night, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.